Today we are reading and reacting to the 10 Commandments of board game design. We are going to tell you all about it, and really, Evan's telling me all about it, because I've never seen it before, so we're both going into this blind.
More than anything, a little ridiculous. I think the guy writing this was mostly joking, but at the same time, he brought up a lot of divisive comments about how board game design ought to be, and I have to rebuttal, because when I hear something that I think is wrong, I have no other choice. We have timestamps below in the description if you want to jump around and just see what these 10 commandments are, but if you watch the entire video, thank you so much for hanging out. It directly helps and supports the channel just by you being here, and we're just happy to have you.
So go on this journey with us through discovering the rules.
The rules! Because, in a way, board game design is a game in itself. So, these are the rules.
Rules and rules, boards of boards.
I almost was speaking about this as if this is like a scholarly piece of writing about, and we're just going to talk about the implications of these comments. This is ridiculous. This is mostly silly, and I think that the writer knows that, but either way, I'm excited to say no. So we're just going to jump into this article here. I don't think this is how the actual 10 Commandments were displayed, but he ranks them 10 to 1. As if it's a countdown to like the most important commandment. So, the 10th commandment. Thou shalt have the common courtesy to include plastic bags.
Okay.
Not if you want to save the earth.
Ooh.
See,
the earth.
There seems to be a dichotomy here in board game publishing. Either there are no bags, tons of components, tons of cards, a bunch of stuff, no bags, or the Stonemaier approach, which I frankly appreciate. Infinite bags.
No, like, listen, the scythe bags have saved me so much trouble.
Don't the scythe bags have holes in them?
Yeah, they have the breathing holes.
Like that.
Like that.
Yeah,
breathing holes.
Sounds just like that.
That's a breathing hole. Really, this has nothing to do with board game design.
That's true. That is not the design of the game. That is
I
how it is
100%
packaged.
agree with this. I don't think that it should be a commandment of game design, because the game designer had no say in that.
Like, top 10? Like,
Come
you
on.
know, mighty number 9.
I actually have a feeling you're going to agree with this one.
Okay, watch out.
The 9th commandment is thou shalt not allow ties.
You know I'm unbelievably competitive.
I know.
Yes.
Does a tie feel like nothing matters in your world anymore?
Yes, I have never felt satisfied after a tie.
Dude, I get that. I get that. I think that ties are sometimes good. And actually, board game design should be able to explore more than the simple win condition of the best player is the best. Because in the nature of games as a concept, there are more ways things can go. And like thinking about the way like politics and war work in general and stuff, it's not always just America won. The idea of game design starting to explore things like any player is trying to accomplish specific things, and sometimes multiple people are able to do that, stuff like that, which is different than ties. So I get that, but I think that there shouldn't necessarily always be simply a tiebreaker, because games aren't always just about that, or they shouldn't have to be. He says winners and losers are mandatory.
Now that's where we might get into trouble. One, because that literally eliminates the entire genre of cooperative games.
Well, you win or lose cooperative games. Imagine tying in Spirit Island. Actually, I think you can. It's like called a suicide victory or something like that, which sounds kind of epic. Anyways, so I get it. I also think that ties in games can be incredibly rewarding. It has to be a specific type of game, though. So, for instance, a tie in Cosmic Encounter is great, because the game is set up to be, there's like negotiation and alliances breaking and forming constantly. So when you end with a tie, sometimes that could be like the perfect moment of, I don't know, ecstasy. Alliance. Yeah, it can be the only way it's rewarding in some ways.
I don't know exactly how to fix it, because it's definitely not satisfying to be like, oh, well, let's break the tie with this metric you haven't been tracking the whole game, but is now important.
And there are some games that they make it really obvious, and it actually matters a lot. Like Pax Pamir. The way that you win in Pax Pamir, there are 4 colors of cards, basically, and each one of them gives you a different stat bonus. So, like, one of them increases your hand size, one of them increases your tableau size. One of them, all it does is says, if you have more of these, you win ties. And ties are, like, point ties are common enough that once you start getting good at the game, you start keeping track of that. And that literally is almost like half a point in a way.
So, like, very similar to PAX Premier would be Mario Party.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you're always trying to get
coins
coins.
also matter.
Yes, stars are so commonly tied, or they're so close, they're always such a low number, like 5 or under, that coins matter. And you're aware that they matter the whole time.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Tiebreaker is where it's something you weren't aware of.
It feels bad.
Yeah.
And that's often what happens with new players. So, but I also, it's just kind of weird when it's like, if you tie, whoever has the most coins wins. If you still tied, whoever has the most of this one obscure part of the...
No, I think
it's just kind of weird.
I think Scythe has one of those. It's ridiculous. It goes like 6 layers deep.
Well, yeah, because they're trying to avoid this inevitable potential...
Yeah.
I guess it's actually a tie.
You know that this commandment is bogus because when you play a game with someone and you do tie, and then they lose that tiebreaker, they're like, yeah, but we tied. I still, like, get some victory.
Yeah.
I'll take that as a win.
Well,
Right? Like, so, like,
Yeah.
if someone is feeling that way...
I mean, I feel that way when I actually lose sometimes.
That's true. You're a jerk.
I'm like, I basically won.
Yeah. That's how I feel. That's what I want out of a game. Would I make it a commandment that is necessary for, like, every game designer? No.
I think that's saying...
just what I want.
And
out of
he
a
even says
game.
that. He says, I don't want any of this shared victory nonsense. But then he says winners and losers are mandatory, and I'm like, I don't know. Anyways, moving on.
So, the 9th suggestion.
Yeah.
And as we... Yeah, exactly. Nice suggestion. What do you guys think about ties? I want to hear... I know everyone... Like, we obviously have differing perspectives on it and how much we value the idea of there should never be a tie, and like we've all tied in a game before, and we all have a different reaction. So like if me and Nathan were to tie, I'd be like, nice, and you'd be like, that's a waste of my time, and I'll be like, but hey, like at least we tied. That's how I feel about it. Anyways, what do you think about it? Do you hate ties? Leave it in the comments below. In the Being Friends Discord server, we have a specific channel all about board game design and just talking about ideas, concepts, the commandments. We're probably going to be discussing this a little bit as the video is released, so make sure you join. The link to the Discord is in the description. It's super easy to join and super fun to hang out and talk about games every day. We're here for the 8th commandment. Thou shalt not include variants. He's
Gross.
basically saying, design your own game. Part of your job is just tuning it to be the right thing, and a bunch of variants just is like saying, I don't actually know what this game is supposed to be. I get the idea. I love variants. Because I think that there are so many different types of players, and when a game says, hey, this is how I design the game, but if you're more this way, I wanted to give you this too. It feels like a courtesy.
Yeah.
Or just more variety.
Yeah. I mean, I know off the top of my head, there's a Tokaido variant I really appreciate, which takes abilities out of the game completely.
Oh.
And so it's incredible for new players, because it's like, here's how the mechanics of this game work. There are no exceptions, so just play.
That's a really common variant. It's just the introduction game, essentially, variant. And then it's basically, a lot of games' variants are just different complexity levels until you play the full game.
Yeah. And if that's your whole concept of variants, I guess I get it. If you're super into board games, and that's like the whole idea that this guy has about variants, then I might get it, because it's like, just learn the game.
I think what he's mostly getting at is when a game like Mage Knight, for instance, says, here's the way the game works. Here's a list of different ways you can play the game if you want to. It says things like, do you want to have more deck building? Then here's the rules for that. Do you want to have no player versus player combat? Solo variants?
Oh.
You can't have a commandment against that.
You can't.
Or else you're just mean. Variants. We have an example for everyone. Page 15 of the Dead of Winter rulebook. Co-op variant, 2-player variant, betrayer variant, which increases the odds of a traitor, hardcore variant, more challenge, player elimination variant. If someone's last survivor dies, they're removed from the game. So yeah, there's a bunch of different ways that you might want to play the game. Maybe they decided in the actual rules that players wouldn't be eliminated, but maybe for some reason you want to go home early. That's the variant for you. Just die.
Yeah.
At the very least, I get the idea, but
yeah, because I think that's where he's coming from. He's like, here's the good game, and here's slightly worse versions of the good game. Mm-hmm. So why even bother with that?
The 7th commandment: Thou shalt not effing cover important information with pieces. I can't think of an example of this happening off the top of my head, but I get the idea. If there's important information on the board or something, and there's generally gonna be pieces on it, that is kind of annoying. Top 10.
Fine, I guess. I don't know if I have a problem, but I also don't know if I've seen it happen very much.
Mm-hmm. And I think that legibility and like good graphic design in games is super important.
Right, but that's not even what he said. Like, these commandments are just like his 10 biggest complaints about bad board game design, not
the 10 pet peeves of board games.
That's pretty much what it is.
It's not. Here's some things that you gotta do.
And again, I don't think the writer was trying to like actually give like good advice. I think he was mostly just like frustrated. It is totally the pet peeves of board game design. All right, the 6th commandment: Thou shalt minimize downtime. What do you think about downtime?
Man,
there's a lot to say about downtime.
Okay, you're making me look bad because I'm agreeing so far.
No, it's fine to not like downtime. Totally. I think Scythe has pretty bad downtime.
So I plan ahead, and I'm so excited. I plan ahead my next turn, sometimes my next like 4 turns, and I'm so excited about what's going to happen, and then I just have to wait for everyone to. I just have to watch these turns that really, depending on the game, have no bearing on what I'm going to do. They're not going to affect me. I'm just going to unleash this crazy move on all of you guys, but
then you just have to wait. It's grueling. It's not fun. So I have a podcast. Me and 𝘊𝘮𝘮𝘮𝘯𝘥𝘮𝘮𝘯𝘮 Critic, we have a podcast called the Better Board Games Podcast, where we talk about a bunch of different things about being a player of games. And one episode we did dive into downtime. We're going to link the episode down below if you want to hear more about that. To summarize, I think that downtime actually is really a good thing in a lot of ways. It depends on the game, it depends on how it's utilized, and depends on how it feels. But there are some times that downtime in a game actually creates breathing room for certain players. And a game might actually be overbearing if it has no downtime at all. Some games like Spirit Island can be just exhausting because you're constantly doing complex decisions until the game is over, which I think is fun. So some games, there's a lot of waiting in a way that takes away from the experience. 100%. I totally agree.
Yeah.
I think that what makes it work in some games is, like you said, the other people's turns don't matter to you in certain games.
Yeah.
And then there's the games where the other people's turns are integral to be paying attention to, either for your own strategic sake or because you're afraid they're going to do something to you, or like something like that.
Yeah. Or even just simply they are interesting to watch.
Mm-hmm.
If you make your game where it's interesting even just to spectate it, then you'll be interested in watching other people's turns.
That's why I don't mind the downtime in Mage Knight, which a lot of people criticize the game for. Because I love Mage Knight so much, watching someone else do you do incredible things every turn in Mage Knight. It brings nearly the same amount of excitement to me, so it just doesn't bother me. But I totally get like the idea that you're just waiting for your turn because I just want to play. I get that.
The worst case scenario with downtime is you're hanging out with your friends, though. Like,
and you got a good point. The question is at that point, like, what are you there for? If you're there for playing the game, then I totally get that. But I think there's a way to enjoy downtime. And those are some things that we dive into more in that podcast episode. We're not going to go all the way into it, but basically, I get the idea of wanting to minimize downtime, but I don't think that cutting out downtime 100% is always the best approach.
Well, because then you're cutting out turns as a concept.
Well, that's why he's saying minimize, but yeah, I think that there is some value to downtime, basically.
Yeah.
The 5th commandment: Thou shalt make me interact with everyone else at the table. He doesn't want multiplayer solitaire games.
Like roll and writes.
Roll and write
Kinda
games, some Euro games, or
The
sometimes
first 4 turns of Scythe.
the first 4 turns of Scythe, right? He's like, honestly, actually that's interesting. A lot of people actually love multiplayer solitaire games because interaction usually means more direct competition, more conflict, and for some people that's worth being out of the game. Maybe that's their commandment, like thou shalt not have conflict. That's fine. I don't think I love conflict in games.
Yeah.
But, and I know you do.
Yes. I like creating it if there isn't any. It's hard because it's like any game where you're not interacting with the other people, or like even games where you're in a situation where maybe you're not interacting with the person on that side of the board.
Right.
No one says you can't speak to them while you play.
Some of the best game experiences I've had was exclusively because of the stuff happening between the players. It had nothing to do with the game at all. He says right here that the other players are always more interesting than the game system.
And that's good.
What he's saying is that what makes the game most interesting is the way that different players interact in the game's system, basically. And that's some of my favorite stuff too. I don't think that it's another suggestion, really.
Yeah, the 5th suggestion.
The 5th suggestion. We're moving on. There's a lot to say about interaction, but the 4th commandment is thou shalt give up on estimating playing time. It's never right.
And that's true.
Except for King Domino.
Okay.
King Domino says it's 15 minutes. It's 15 minutes. And you don't even have to be that fast. But no, in general, yeah. Like, it says an hour. You have to say, it says an hour. It's probably going to be 2 hours.
And let me tell you,
Until you're familiar.
I've said those kinds of words before when I was introducing a person to the new game. Like, hey, this says 120 minutes. Ignore that. Because that's not what's going to happen.
Yep. And but at the same time, like, what does Scythe say? Because
I think Scythe says 120 minutes.
We played a 3-player game of Scythe in 45 minutes once. But we had to work for that, right? So it is almost never right. Again, that has nothing to do with game design, but
Not the
true.
Not the design of the game.
Which I think we just have to let go of that. We just have to swallow the pill that this has nothing to do with game design. It's just his pet peeves.
The 10 pet peeves.
The 10 pet peeves of games. Anyways, the 3rd commandment: thou shalt not keep sending me back to the rules book. I thought they were called rule books.
Yeah, me too.
Not rules book.
But maybe that's more accurate.
The rules.
There are
booklet.
multiple rules in the book.
There really are. At least multiple. Whatever that means. Okay, so he basically says, I love reading manuals one time. He's basically pleading that games have information on the board and in player aids and make your player aids readable and whatnot, not just having all of it in the rule book so that I have to keep on going back to it. I think that's a great premise, like thing to think about when you're making a game. Going from the game to the rule book is often taking everyone out of the experience, ruining the flow. So I actually mostly completely agree that the game that's a bad moment when you have to go back to the rule book. But that's a sacrifice I'm willing to make when it comes to playing a really good game, and sometimes really good games are more complex and require that for a little while.
Well, and usually the more often you have played a heavy game, because this happens in heavy games, is primarily where this is happening.
Yeah.
The more often you've played it, the more you just are familiar with it. And for other players, you can be that rule book because they can ask you, and now you're like,
and
it's like this.
That just comes down to how you introduce games to people. It's often, if you say, hey, come to my game night, and then they get here, and then you have this game in shrink wrap right in front of them. It's like, all right, we're going to play this new game. That's terrible for everyone.
Oh, that's the worst.
Learn the game, get familiar with it, and then play it by yourself, and then show them.
I've got to do it. I don't have that many Shelf of Shame games, but I have a few games that I've never played. They're still in the wrap, but that's probably the reason, is because I bring it places, but I never want to open it up with people. I want to play the games that I already know how to play, so we can just start playing this game together.
Anyways, you can avoid going to the rulebook a bunch with just being familiar with the game before you are showing people. Then it's not a big deal. Maybe.
I do dread the day that I have to learn Spirit Island on my own.
when you have to know all of the way that it actually
Evan's a great
works.
Spirit Island rulebook.
I am a good Spirit
Evan's a
actually
great
works.
Spirit Island rulebook.
I am a good Spirit Island rulebook. Anyway, so a lot of games have that moment, and I don't think that it's something that if a game has that moment a lot, it doesn't for me make the game suffer. I know that for some people it does.
I love Betrayal. That is like a huge complaint about Betrayal, because it is built into the game.
Yeah.
That halfway through the game you have to now read a rule book.
It's required of the game. It's supposed to be the most exciting moment of the game, but then it's immediately diffused by the fact that everyone goes to separate places and learns how to play a game.
Which, I don't know, feels exciting when you're the trader, but when
not if you're not good at learning how to play a game from the rule
well,
book.
actually,
Then
that's true.
Then you're the trader by yourself in the dark.
That's terrifying as the trader, now that I think about it, because you're having to go through the experience that some people are having to go through with any game, which is, oh, there's nobody else here to help me figure this out, so I'm literally just reading this rulebook in a vacuum, and I have to hope that I'm getting it right.
In a vacuum cleaner, too. Not comfortable.
Very cramped.
Betrayal's actually really notable for the next commandment, because the next commandment is, thou shalt write an excellent rulebook.
Yeah, we had an experience.
When we learned Betrayal at our local game store, we pulled it off the shelf, we're like, I guess we'll play it. We've heard of this game and stuff. It was so hard to learn.
No, we were trying to read the rulebooks, and we're like,
how does this all work?
is this... Hold on.
And then we were like playing it, and we're like,
then we
is
played,
this right?
and we'd still look at
Nothing
the
made
rules.
sense.
And it's like, and now we know that Betrayal, at least before the haunt, is literally move, draw card. That's the mechanic.
Incredibly simple. It is one of the most dramatic, like, we thought it was so complicated because none of it made sense in the rulebook, but it's actually so dang simple. And I don't know how they did it so terribly. But it seriously, like, took away from the experience in a way. Like, obviously we ended up playing it more, and then what took away from the experience was other things, but...
You know what I mean? And that's the real reason that you have to have a good rules book. Because we can talk about, you know, being a good host and being able to teach people games.
Right.
Or there's YouTube channels literally dedicated to game tutorials. But somebody somewhere will have to
Someone
learn
has
from
to learn
the
from the
rulebooks.
rulebook. And if you can't learn the game well or right, like some people, and even myself, play a game multiple times, like 10, 20 times, with a rules misconception. I think it's actually inevitable. And there's probably some really great rulebooks that doesn't happen as much in. But anyways, yeah, someone's learning from the rulebook. That can make or break the way people experience the game, which is a big deal. So it is a big, important thing.
It's an art with anything. Like...
Mm-hmm.
Assembly manuals for furniture. That's what comes to mind. It's like
pretty much the rule book.
Because I've sorry. So I'm getting an apartment ready for me and my fiance once we're married, and so I've been putting together a lot of furniture.
Does it feel the same as learning the rules?
And
for
so
a game?
some of them are like, do this. Here's what it looks like. Put it here. It comes in bag number 1. Do it.
It's so.
And I'm like, okay. Awesome. And some of them are so unclear what to do. They're like, look at this picture.
That's what you do.
Freaking solve the Pythagorean theorem, and then maybe you'll figure out.
That's a really easy theorem, by the way.
It is. Rulebook shouldn't just be exclusively, here is a compendium of all the rules in the game. It should walk you through, here's what you need to know. Here's how the flow of the game works. You need to understand it. But however... There's also, like, a place for that compendium.
Right. He says, so if you can't write good rules, thorough, readable, and easy to reference. He says those are the 3 things that make a good rulebook. And I completely agree with that, actually. There's 2 things that happen when you're interfacing with the rulebook. You're either learning the game for the first time, or, like he's talking about before, you're referencing the rules when you don't know how it actually works. And a really good rulebook makes that incredibly efficient, really easy to find what you need to know, and look at it and figure that out. There's a lot of really good rulebooks that do that. They make that moment as efficient as possible. And then some that just cause you to flip through and never be able to find, I don't know where this rule is. And those are the rulebooks that suffer, I think, the most. The number 1 greatest commandment of board game design of all time.
Lord, what is the greatest commandment?
This one actually makes me the most upset about all of them. thou shalt not bother with toys. He says, if I wanted to buy a set of action figures, I'd do that. But I'm not going to because I'm not 12 anymore. I don't need fancy miniatures, and neither does your game. Go hawk that nonsense to X-Wing and Warhammer players who don't know any better.
Not X-Wing and Warhammer. He's insulting players.
He's saying that games with miniatures are, I don't know, dumb, and that people who want that, who care about that, who desire that, who think that that is one of the reasons why they like the games, don't know any better.
Oh, your favorite game isn't checkers?
Dude,
do you
miniatures?
actually like board games?
I bet that someone played checkers and was like, this is not cool. We needed characters, so they made chess, and that was their first. Chess is the first miniatures game. Tell me I'm wrong.
Now I want a little checkers, where all the guys are just little warrior
like
guys,
blood rage miniatures.
but then you also have a little piece that you can put on them.
That would be great. No, I think this is just like a shallow mindset. He's saying that people who desire this in games shouldn't. That shouldn't matter to them. And that's dumb.
He's kind of saying that the mechanics are the only art form that can go into a board game.
Right.
And there's other ways for them to be artistic, one of them being the design.
The components in general. And sometimes the components are plastic miniatures. Like, for a lot of people, including myself, the miniatures actually bring you into the game more. It brings immersion. It creates part of the experience. It's great. Plus, you get to do things like, for some people, building the miniatures and painting them is actually, it's just a part of the hobby for them.
Yeah.
It's like a ritual. And right. I think that saying that's like dumb is the stupidest thing in the world.
It comes to what's important to you, because so Scythe does have miniatures, but think about its art. The art doesn't need to be there for Scythe to be a game. But it would be so much less of one if it was gone.
Mm-hmm. I don't think he's saying that games shouldn't have art. And actually, one thing I do know is that a lot of games do have really cool miniatures and awesome components and stuff. But the gameplay experience is shallow and the design is not very good. That is worth addressing. Don't just slap on some miniatures and say, here, now you want to buy this game. You really do need to make sure that the game can stand alone without the miniatures. He says, I don't need miniatures, and neither does your game. And I think that's fair. Don't use it as a crutch for your game.
The game should be good in the first place, and then make some awesome miniatures, because please
they're
do.
awesome. And not every game should have miniatures.
Go shouldn't have miniatures.
Oh my gosh.
Tons of them. That'd be so funny. Oh my gosh.
That was the
Those
10 commandments
are the 10
of board
commandments
games.
of board game design. I don't know. I agree with some of them in some amount. I don't think any of them should be commandments.
The 10 suggestions, or even the 10 pet peeves. And also, some of them don't even have to do with the way the game's designed.
It's just
bags.
So here's the article should be called 10 things that make me annoyed. Anyways, I don't know. I know this guy's mostly joking. It's obviously not it's not a thesis about game design by any means. We're talking about kind of like it is and criticizing it. But no, we're just having a good time. I hope that you had a good time as well and enjoyed that. We want to hear from you. What commandments did you agree with? Which ones did you completely disagree with?
And what are your commandments?
What could
you come up with? Yeah,
what are your pet peeves in board games? Huge shout out to all of our patrons: Becky Street, Stacy Hampton, Michael Rosado, Stephen Eddins, Toady Beck, and Travis C. We seriously appreciate you guys so much.
You are my people.
So we'll talk to you real quick over on this after show called the Being Friends After Slap. I think it should be called that.
It does not sound friendly enough.
So we're gonna keep talking about this, about game design, about commandments, about pet peeves in games. It's gonna be on our Patreon. So if you're interested in checking our Patreon out, check it out. It's in the description. If you are interested in designing your own board games, this video is a great place to start.